sitting. If you feel more comfortable lying down, then lying down, that's fine. Remembering that this is more about staying awake than falling asleep. So if you find yourself sleepy, if you find yourself that you get too comfortable and fall asleep, then maybe sitting up a little bit can be helpful, making sure that you have the right airflow. I wouldn't say right, but making sure that the air can come in and out. Sometimes when we slouch, we tend to block our air pathway. So just allowing for the flow of air to come in naturally, making sure that you're not too comfortable that you might fall asleep. And just taking a moment to welcome yourself in this moment. Allowing yourself to settle right into the chair or the cushion. As we explore this attitudinal foundation of non-judging and mindfulness. Focusing today on self-judgment. So noticing if it may be me saying that even brings some thinking into the mind. Takes you in the story of your own self-judgment. And seeing if you can leave it all to the side right now and bring your attention to the body sitting here. Noticing those areas of contact of the body, the chair, the seat. Allowing the body to just fully rest here. Safely sinking into the surface, fully supported by the earth beneath. Arriving fully to now, to the only moment you have. Eyes open, eyes closed. Whatever works for you. If your eyes are open, maybe lowering the gaze, giving the body the message that we're tuning inward and not outward. And then just noticing if there is any tension, any tightness in the body that might want to soften up at this moment. Maybe allowing the shoulders to drop. Allowing the belly to soften up if there's tension or tightness here. It's a very common place where we hold tension. And again, this is an invitation. You might notice that at times it's not possible to let go of the tightness or tension, and that's okay. Just remembering that it changes all on its own. Everything changes, everything passes. There's a lot in the mind right now. That's okay. Just noticing that the mind might have a lot to say right now. But we can just allow it to kind of drift into the background. And seeing if you can very gently allow your attention to rest on the body breathing here, the breath, sensations of the breath in the body. Meeting yourself at this moment. Meeting this awareness. The awareness of being here right now. Honoring the moment as the most important moment of your life. Because the moment before this moment is in the past, and the moment after this moment is in the future. It's not here. It's not now. So coming right back to the moment. Every time you notice the mind wandering, telling stories, escorting your attention very gently, kindly, back to this moment by focusing on the breath, focusing on the body, sitting, lying here. And noticing what the moment is bringing. How are we encountering this moment? Is there any judgment? And if you notice any judgment, just acknowledging it. It's just another thought. It's just what the mind does. Bringing your attention right back to the body, sitting, lying, the breath. Noticing when there is any judgment rising in the mind, judgment about doing this right, doing this wrong, judgment about all the thinking that comes through, maybe judgment about the moment before, the way you encounter the moment. If you notice any judgment at all, just acknowledging it for what it is, a natural process of the mind. That's all. And then whenever you notice this judgment, just coming right back to the breath, the body, the moment. Noticing how sometimes the judgment triggers the heart to feel. Noticing what's in the heart along with that. Is there an emotion that might be present? And if there is, can we make room for it? Can we care for it? Can we soften up around it? And every time you notice the mind wandering or yourself getting caught in a story, every time you score your attention right back to the moment. Can you notice if there is a judgment along with that? You might notice that there is a judgment often with just about everything we do. I'm not good enough. I'm not doing this right. So non-judging doesn't mean that we don't judge, because judging is a natural process of the mind. It just means that we notice it and we don't get caught up in it. Understanding it that it's just a thought. It will pass, might trigger a strong emotion. So maybe something to attend. Might notice the body tighten. Another thing to attend. That's all. Just calling our attention. Who are we in this moment? We're not the judgment, for sure. So maybe I'm going to invite you to just bring up a self-judgment that you encounter often. It doesn't have to be anything too big. Maybe a 3 or 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. But just a self-judgment that comes up often for you. It could be something in relationship to the scale. Every time we weigh ourselves, or maybe a judgment about the moment. It could be, I'm fat, I'm thin. I'm not good at this. And so just noticing that, taking some time to notice this judgment that you might encounter often in your life. Something about yourself, self-judgment. And as you bring this judgment to mind, this self-judgment, noticing what it triggers in you, tuning into the heart. Is there any emotion that might be present here? Tuning into the body. Is there any tension? Just by doing this, you're being compassionate. This is an act of love and self-compassion. The side of compassion is understanding. In order to understand, we must know what's happening. And now, what will be an alternative way of noticing the same? For instance, I might notice that the scale is pointing to a few more pounds this week. And I might say to myself, I'm fat. And I notice that judgment now. What will be another way to look at it with discernment? Maybe, couple more pounds than last week. That's a fact. The number's gone up. That's a fact. So seeing if you can do that with your own judgment. When the fact is blinded by perception, it's not a fact anymore. I'm fat. I'm thin. It's blinded by perception. And now maybe tuning in to whatever it is that's rising for you at this moment and allowing for that space. Allowing for a different way to look at it in a compassionate way. What will be a compassionate thing to say at this moment? What will be a loving thing to say? A caring thing to say to myself, even if I've gained, in that example, a lot of weight, what would be a kind thing to say? Chances are that I wouldn't say that to someone else, to a good friend. And even tuning in for those times in which maybe that judgment was useful at some point in your life. Maybe it prevented you from certain things, maybe protected you. And maybe now you can say, or invite yourself to say, thank you. Thank you, I no longer need you. Thank you, you helped me in the past, but I got it now. So can we meet this moment, even this moment of judgment towards ourselves, with kindness? With appreciation for the role it had at some point. Without getting into the narrative of what these words mean, without trying to understand the logic behind it, really tuning into a sense of love, kindness towards yourself. So John Wellwood, in his poem Forget About Enlightenment, and this is one of my favorite poems, and you might have heard it before because I often read it. He says, sit down, whatever you are, and listen to the wind singing in your veins. Feel the love, the longing, the fear in your bones. Open your heart to who you are right now. Know who you would like to be. Not the saint you're striving to become, but the being right here before you, inside you, around you. All of you is holy. You're already more and less than whatever you can know. Breathe out, touch in, and let go. And so last week we talked about the attitudinal foundations of non-judging. And so with mindfulness, we approach judging as a natural function of the mind, but by being present and paying attention, we can notice the judging mind and we can create some space for the judgment. This is a sense of acceptance. So self-judgment is when the judgment is directed towards ourselves. And it taps into the core idea of who we are. So this can happen when we're talking to others, or maybe someone says something to us, or even when we contemplate the idea of pursuing something we want. There is the I'm not good enough, I'm fat, comparing ourselves. I should or I shouldn't be this way or that way. So self-judgment could manifest in different ways, but it's usually a thought about how we perceive ourselves at that moment. And this often triggers a physical sensation and an emotion. So being aware of this is really important, noticing the emotion behind it. Because if we give a room, most likely it would allow us to process that. So through the practice of mindfulness, we become aware of these judgments. We notice how we relate to ourselves in the present, in the past, or the projection that we have about ourselves in the future. And so you can even say that even the self-judgment is very much set on a perception of ourselves, perception of the moment. How are we arriving to this moment? How are we seeing ourselves in this moment? And a way to notice self-judgment is to notice the comparing mind. A comparison often to an imaginary alternative that might be based on past beliefs, thinking that there's a better alternative reality. So the intricate need for things to be different than they actually are, the aversion for things the way they are. So it creates a judgment. So Naira Wahid, who I read last week, says, you can see your face and you see a flaw. And she says, how? if you are the only one who has this face, you can see your face, you can see a flaw. How? If you are the only one who has this face. And so as we practice, as we do our formal practice, we can notice sometimes this comparison, this frustration when we experience certain bliss, even in meditation, certain calmness. Now we feel we're worth of the practice. We're doing something right. We're good at this. I'm great at this. Look, I'm experiencing bliss. I'm experiencing peacefulness. This is it. I'm good. What happens when we don't? What happens when there's chaos in the mind because of the moment right before or because of the future, because we're going through a difficult time? I'm not good at this. I'm terrible at this. I can't do this. So again, we're going against it. We're resisting what is. So the invitation is to open up to it. In judgment, even self-judgment, it allows us to see how we're navigating this moment, right? This is another way for us to know when we're aware of what's happening. So it's important to pay attention to it. But it's not, the idea is to not identify with it. It's a thought just like every other thought. It might trigger strong emotions, and that's something to take care of. That's something to attend to with loving kindness and compassion. So acceptance could be an interesting thing. And as I say, the attitudinal foundations, they're all one contained within the other, right? And so if we resist it, we're not accepting it. Acceptance just means that we're seeing it for what it is. And this allows for discernment. And there goes that practice of what's another way of seeing this? I just said to myself, and this is just an example, of course, it's just a common example, I think, to think of our form of our body and the identification we have with it, and the critical mind going into I'm fat, I'm skinny. The things that we don't like, again, about ourselves. That's what brings the self-judgment, right? The things that we think in our minds that we should comply to, right? And so accepting means that we notice this as a natural process of the mind without identifying, without making it personal. It's not. And so that being said, again, with mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is practiced from a place of acceptance. We're practicing because we want things. If we're practicing because we want things to go one way or another, or we want to become something other than we are, we're really not practicing mindfulness. Because mindfulness allows for that awareness to really embrace it all, to understand that that's just a process of the mind. We're not trying to get anywhere. We're not trying to change anything, but this awareness can give us a deep foundation for self-inquiry, for investigation. And that's another layer, right? Now that we know that there's this judgment about me every time I encounter this situation, this is compassion again. How can I bring kind curiosity to this? I would do this for a friend if he was telling me something. I would want to know more. What happened? How did this come about? We do the same thing. And so in that moment, we're holding everything with acceptance and compassion. And so just for a moment, maybe taking just a moment to ponder on the thought of what are some ways that you can become more aware of your self-judgment, of the self-judgment in your life. What are some ways, some mindful ways, maybe, bringing that awareness? And how can we become more compassionate towards it? How can we embrace it and hold it in this sense of love and kindness. So that's a little bit of food for thought, something to consider as we move on to the groups. And so before we do that, just taking one moment again to tune into yourself, deep inside your heart, whatever you might feel, this sense of being at this moment, this compassionate being that is here. And maybe you might think that there is not much compassion in you. But just look at yourself here at this moment. This is the greatest act of self-compassion. So bringing a sense of gratitude towards that part of you that's brought you here and embracing it, for coming to do your practice, for being here in community. So thank you for this moment. Thank you for being here with one another.